Welcome to Rose City Politics. It is February the 10th. We are so happy to be here with you tonight. Our regular panel tonight includes Pat Papadeus. Pat, how are you tonight?
I'm very well, really happy to be here.
You took an e-scooter to get here as quickly as possible.
I did. I'm doing my part in diversification in the future.
It is great to be with such a trailblazer. Speaking of other trailblazers, we have Don Merrifield Jr. here, who blazes trails, on regular trails on a motorcycle.
I do. Always happy to be here. I would have taken an e-scooter, but too many head injuries and it just doesn't work anymore.
We also have Doug Sartori here. Doug, how are things in the mailroom?
Going just fine. I swear to God, I'm getting closer to getting this whole Pepe Sylvia mystery solved.
We need to get to the bottom of it. I know there's a really big opportunity for, and it's always sunny in Philadelphia podcast crossover here. So we're going to get those new audience listeners as well. If you're listening right now, which of course you are, because you're listening, head over to patreon.com/Rose City Politics. If you're not already one of our Patreon subscribers, we need Patreon subscribers to be able to put out this show on a weekly basis. Don has very expensive habits and he takes all the cash for himself. So please become a Patreon. Don, do you have a little shout out to our Patreon subscribers and how they're helping you out?
Look, this cigars and whiskey aren't going to pay for themselves, people. So kick in some cash. And obviously, we also want to thank our BizX friends over there. John, maybe you want to yell at them.
Absolutely. We do have a brand new BizX column that we are doing on a monthly basis. We have one that dropped for January that is on print stands now, or you could head to bizxmagazine.com and check it out. We talk about the upcoming budget. This month for February, we are writing a piece about this week's topic. It was also last week's topic as well. The economic development report that was prepared by a UK firm. And we're going to be diving into that and, trying to add a bit more insight to it. But first, we got to let you know we're broadcasting live on tape. So tweet at us if you want, but you're not going to be getting to us right as we're recording. And as always, Rose City Politics is brought to you with the kind support of Leuna 625, Building Better Communities. Now, as I said at the top, we're going to be talking about this new economic development report that City Council commissioned. It was unanimously voted for by everyone there. We talked last week about this. Public First, they are a public relations, public strategy, and public researching firm that was contracted to put together our next decade. What will Windsor look like? How will we capitalize on the assets we have, overcome the pitfalls if they do exist? And who better to figure that out than going 6,000 kilometers away from us and asking them what is wrong and right about us here in Windsor? So let's get right into this. As I said, council voted unanimously. It was a marathon council meeting, but they voted unanimously to adopt this economic development report. It's all about enticing talented people to come here and stay here. We know that this youth attraction and retention has been something that we've been talking about on the show for years. It's been the elusive unicorn or dragon that Windsor has been just puffing and chasing after. Hard to figure out a key strategy to, achieve it. But Public First, they think that they've got a plan here that's going to be able to do it. Now, Mayor Dilkins was quoted as saying that when he spoke to these consultants, he made it clear he wanted this to be an academic centered type of plan. Last week, we talked about how, the methodology of it was a little bit shaky at certain times, but there was a lot of good information to glean from it. I know that a lot of you who are listening to us didn't agree with us, and you let us know via some of our social media channels and private channels, and that's fine. It's not a big problem. We like to get that kind of feedback. Now, what I did find really funny from this Windsor Star article, and then I'm going to shift to Doug and Pat to talk about the actual meeting, the council meeting itself. Mayor Dilkins pointed to the 2017-2018 Amazon HQ2 headquarters investment and argued that Washington, D.C. didn't succeed due to any incentives that they provided, nor their transit system specifically, but rather because Washington was able to provide exceptional talent. And aside from that being, just a little bit of a dig at some of the people who already live here in Windsor, and apparently we're not quite up to that snuff, I found it really funny, you guys, and this is sort of off point, but did anyone ever really think that Bezos wasn't going to be putting the Amazon headquarters in Washington or New York or LA? It's a guy worth billions. He's not coming to Windsor or Detroit. It was never going to happen, but I find it funny that that was the launching off point. Doug?
Well, I don't think that we were the longest shot who put in a bid. Sault Ste. Marie, I believe, also made a bid for Amazon. So in the universe of bids, we were not near the bottom in terms of likelihood. But I tend to agree with you. I think that the Amazon's call for proposals was a lot about public relations and a lot about generating buzz more than it was about creating a legitimately competitive opportunity. I think lots of people in Windsor and Detroit bought into that bid for reasons of their own. I did not speak to anybody privately during that process who thought that there was a good chance for Detroit and Windsor to succeed. So, I think folks went into it hoping for the kind of benefits that we did see, those that cross-border collaboration and increasing conversations between Windsor and Detroit. So it may have been an expensive way to achieve it, but it did create some dialogue that wasn't there before.
Yeah, I mean, if it could be used as a springboard for these kinds of cross-border partnerships and conversations, great. Really sucks that it happened and then COVID happened and the border's been shut for a year and we've really lost any of that momentum that could have been built on. But let's talk about this council meeting. I know that both of you watched it in depth. I was jumping back and forth in and out of it. Pat, what was your takeaway? You sit through these meetings professionally. You sit through them because you enjoy the pain of having to watch these meetings on a private time basis like we all do. What was your takeaway after watching this?
Well, it was a work day, so I didn't see the whole meeting. I sort of came in. I think I came in when I think it was the president of the university, Rob Gordon. I think it was when I came in. Can't remember the order. Maybe just one or two delegates before him. And I mean, it was an 8-hour marathon. It definitely was painful. And I, in fact, had a dentist appointment that afternoon and asked if I could keep listening to it. So the pain was like, twofold. And they did. They let me listen to it while I was sitting there and reclining. So it was definitely a long meeting. I thought it was terrific to see how many, the delegates that did come out and speak to it. Most of them, I think, were invited, contrary to what the mayor said at the end, which I don't know why he said that. For anybody that watched till the end, at one point he said the same thing. It was great to see everybody come to council to speak to it, and that he hadn't asked them, which I find terribly hard to believe. And I guess it doesn't count if your chief of staff or someone from your office asks instead. But regardless, I thought it was great that they did come. And it was great to see, leaders from the different sectors come before council. It's always good to see them. It reminds us that we're one community. So in many ways, it set the stage for what was going to happen at that meeting. And it was a lot of good contributions from the different delegations. It certainly wasn't, or some were, but not everybody was a cheerleader. There was a general consensus that this is a good thing. Taking a look at a report that brings together things that many of us know, nonetheless serves a purpose. And I guess we'll talk about that. And I think ultimately, given the unanimous decision, council felt that too. I think everybody saw the minute that you start to include everyone in this report. And I think that included every counselor. Everybody saw a little something that they wanted. And, you know, perhaps there were, you know, 3 things that they liked and 6 things that they didn't, or this wasn't the place to get into the details necessarily of it, necessarily. And overall, I think the question was, are you going to endorse this report at the end? And are we going to go move forward with it? And I think that the way that it was presented, the way that the PR company, Public First, managed it, I think that they actually did a really good job. They saw what it would take. They executed it in that way. And I did listen to the show last week, not talking about necessarily all the data or all the connections or things that they missed and things that perhaps were not completely on point, but overall, they did their job. They presented a report. They brought the people together. You know, the work was done to be representative of some. We'll talk about who was missing, and the report was endorsed. So that, I think, is a success from their perspective.
Doug, what was your take?
I agree with a lot of what Pat had to say. You know, I think that that was a long path to get to what was probably going to be an inevitable outcome. I think pretty early on it was clear that there was a lot of support around the table. But it was really valuable to hear from so many community leaders and so many leaders of institutions as delegates, and to have the back and forth between council and those delegates, I think was really valuable. Not only did we hear the conversation about what the hopes for the future were, but there were also some questions asked about the past, which I thought was really valuable. And overall, I thought that the delegation portion of that meeting, when we got past the presentation by Rachel Wolf and Blair Gibbs and got into the delegations, I thought that that was maybe a little bit of a prototype or a dress rehearsal for how this thing might actually go in the future. And that is to have an open conversation with lots of people around the table who have the ability to move one piece or another of this file forward, and a little bit of accountability for their performance. And I really hope that what we saw here, which was a spirit of cooperation, but some challenging conversations. I think that is a terrific model for how this should go forward in terms of the relationship between council or a committee or however, whatever kind of body city council determines is going to take the lead on this, and the community.
You know, it is a really impressive list of just the organizations that took part in it as delegations, without saying like who was there representing it, because it'd be way too long. We had St. Clair College, Ford of Canada, the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association, Jameson Canada, University of Windsor, Green Shield, APMA, Fairmount Properties, WeTech, Workforce Windsor Essex Regional Chamber of Commerce, the Downtown Business Accelerator, the Downtown Windsor Districting Committee, the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation, Bike Windsor Essex, the Windsor Essex Economic Development Corporation, of course, Tourism Windsor Essex Pelee Island. And if I missed any there, I apologize going through that list. It's really a who's who, really a who's who. What was said? What stood out by these people in terms of what the report is offering, and you know, if they thought that it would work or if there were issues with it, Doug?
So for the most part, I think you could break the uh, delegates down into a few categories. There were folks who were there to talk about how positioning their organization, talking about how their organization's work fits in with the goals of this initiative and how they might help in the future. So there was a bit of that. I think that also some organizations were there to talk about what what they would like to see and what elements of this report were valuable to them. So a few different approaches, but what struck me the most and what I was the most interested in hearing about was the folks who from organizations who work directly on economic development or some aspect of diversification. Hearing their feedback and seeing the back and forth with counselors, I thought that was to me the most interesting piece. The other piece that I thought was really interesting was the two post-secondary institutions, St. Clair College and the university, Patty France and Rob Gordon, respectively, talking about their institutions and facing some challenges from counselors in terms of what they can do to help with retention. The statistic was brought up that I thought was really interesting by Counselor Bordelin, that the University of Windsor is seventh in the country in terms of graduating people with computer science degrees. But when you look at the talent landscape in terms of our workforce, there was a report that was cited, the CBRE report, that ranks Canadian cities for innovation. And we turned up 19th on that list in 2020, which was a one-place drop from 18th on that list the year before. And we have a really, really small pool of actual tech workers in Windsor. So there was some opportunity to explore some things that I think are really valuable, and there's not often a public forum for discussing them. So I was really most interested in those pieces.
Now, Mayor Dilkins was quoted as saying that, and one of the big pillars of it, obviously the report, was talking about this education component and the need to better link the educational institutions with what's going on in the city itself, so that they're both sort of able to play off of each other to ensure that each are building upon one another. Did it come up like what that could look like tangibly in any specific way beyond what you were saying, like, maybe putting out more of a specific degreed program?
I didn't hear a lot of specifics. Pat, maybe you remember some specific promises or commitments that were made. I think that in the main, most of the delegates, including the post-secondary institutions, were offering a general commitment to cooperate and an agreement on the substance of the report as worthwhile goals and making a commitment to do their part.
I agree. Again, I didn't, it's very difficult to focus that many hours. I wasn't completely focused on the meeting. I try to keep an ear on the meeting. I didn't hear that. I didn't get to see Patty France at the top. I think she must have been the first one. So I can't really speak to that. But I didn't hear much of detail coming from any of the delegations in terms of what specifics might be done. And I think it might even be premature, depending on how you want to look at what this actually does. It sort of sets the stage, but I don't know that, that the scenes are all there. And I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that's what they have to navigate and find. I think that, you know, I can't remember which delegate it was. I think but he was definitely from the East Coast. It might have been the Green Shield fellow, but he talked about, the tide rising, lifting everyone. And I think that that was a general sort of sentiment that, now that we've been brought together, we can take a look and see, the metaphors of rowing together in the same boat and in the same direction. The word ecosystem, that one I really wanted to make a drinking game, and we would have been hammered if we had a shot every time that word was mentioned. But there were definitely some themes around that, and for the most part, I think they were there to lend support. In some cases, as Doug said, I think they were there to correct or add to the record, if you will. So I think most organizations, what it takes is these are strategic directions. This is not a strategic plan. This is there are no well, It depends how you look at it. I mean, I think that they haven't adopted necessarily, and I think they were clear at the end that they're not necessarily adopting every idea that's in here. And therefore, if they're not adopting every idea, then they're not adopting all the goals. I think that has to be fleshed out as we move forward in this process. So I think when you're dealing with organizations whether they're the post-secondary institutions or they're, the private sector companies, everyone has their own mission, their own vision, their own goals, and they all have their own strategic plans. And so I think really at a high level, what should happen if there's a commitment to we're all working together is organizations should be going back now. And that includes organizations that may not have even been mentioned, organizations that may not be in the report, did not show up as delegates, but that theoretically, if we're working as one, in many ways, we should be going back into our organizations and talking about how our strategic plans align with the communities, the city's strategic directions. I think that would make sense at a high level.
Undoubtedly. Were any delegates asked to go to their parents for this type of funding and to move forward with anything like this?
Look, man, if you're just going to steal my jokes all the time,
It's going to be
No
ping
point.
ponging back and forth, Don.
there's no point in me even being here.
Well,
No,
he's trying to give you an opening.
He did, and I appreciate it. Actually, Pat came up with a great idea. A great plan for Windsor really is to make us the hub of the world's biggest drinking game, so we could do that online all around the world every time a meeting happens, so you can get drunk in the world. I think from a broad look, I didn't watch the meeting. I was visiting my grandkids, who are more important to me than a city council meeting. But to kind of go back on what we discussed a bit about last week about this really is just it's an oversight plan. This is trying to get everybody pointed in the right direction. What Doug had mentioned earlier with the Amazon comments from the mayor makes me feel a little concerned that the pushback he starts with on that thing is things that he didn't like in the first place. So it feels a bit like he used that as an excuse to kind of beat down the people who come up against him and say things like transit that are super important, and maybe he doesn't feel that way. But in a plan like this, I think one of the big issues we're going to be dealing with, and one of the big things that really could make something like this happen, are really our educational institutions. We have some, like Doug said, we graduate a lot of computer science kids. We have a great engineering program down at the university. St. Clair's doing a lot of good stuff with programming, things like that. The health and research stuff they're doing at the university could certainly be something they could key off of and try and combine that with the hospital and infrastructure wherever it ends up. I don't want to get into that conversation. I think this is really
we will.
I know, but not right now. I think it's really important that the educational institutions are on board, because they're the ones that can really change direction in this city if they're pushed enough and if they get enough cooperation from the municipality and maybe even some other levels of government. So I think it's great that they were there, and I think that's going to be a very big part of this if it were to be successful.
So I'm going to, oh, sorry, go ahead, Doug.
So I just want to comment on what Don had to say there. I do think the post-secondary institutions are important. I think particularly it's really important that St. Clair College, because the college is training workers, and that is their, the even more than the university, preparing people for the world of work directly is the role of the college in our community. I think it's really important that they do the things that they need to do to align their program offerings with the needs of the community. But those computer science graduates who are graduating from the University of Windsor and finding opportunity elsewhere are not leaving because the university failed them somehow. They're leaving because the opportunities don't exist in the private sector. The university can only do so much. And what it's going to take is good jobs and career opportunities to change that statistic and get us moving higher on the list in terms of tech talent in our community. The university is doing their part on that one. So I just wanted to make that comment, because I agree with you that the post-secondary institutions are a really, really important asset, and they're the thing that makes this more possible for us than it might for other communities that lack a university and a college within the city limits. But it's really the private sector that is on the hook here to make those opportunities exist for the young people who are graduating.
Yeah, and
I
from
agree, and I want to I want to pick up on that because that's where I was going to go with this as well. You know, John, the university and the college being key here is in fact what the mayor at the end said was his major input. And the first thing he said to the consultants when he met with them, which is also interesting because in the report itself, in fact, that's the first thing that the report says. So let me draw a connection here and come back to what I was talking about, which is this is very clearly this entire report, this entire process was led by the mayor's office, funded through the mayor's office, and directed through the mayor's office. And in fact, we can at some point get to, you know, how it's going to ultimately be implemented, both what was said and maybe what was not said. And I think that those are important pieces. But at the end of the day, you know, it does say that you know, that there should be a Windsor Talent Steering Committee chaired by the mayor. I'll get to that. There's a lot of sort of consolidation of power in the recommendations in one seat there at the mayor's seat, and to include the university and the college. And again, I'm going to go back to what Doug said. In many ways, you know, it's interesting because it's almost like saying, you know, because we didn't have that before, I guess, if we do change the way that we work together, city, university, and college, some things are going to happen. And I just don't see the clear way. I think that there are some things for sure in terms of community engagement, in terms of developments. We certainly see both the college and the university having moved into the core, and that being a huge part of the ability to revitalize the core and the influx of students and continue things like that. We also see impacts that those institutions may have on the community when we're not completely prepared. You know, the what happens with transit when you bring in a whole bunch of students that need that same route that others need to take to work, et cetera. So there's all sorts of things. But in terms of the economic diversification piece, I don't see the clear lines unless it is that there is real conversations about where the jobs are in the future and how quickly college, university, but as I think Doug mentioned, particularly the college, can adapt and very quickly start to provide programs to prepare students for those jobs. And those are external factors. When you take a look at an institution, there are a lot of institutional barriers to quickly moving. These are not private businesses where I decide, oh, you know what, today, you know, poutine is very popular. I put that on the menu and I figure out, you know, how we're going to make that. It requires ministry approvals. It requires, you know, industry experts serving on program advisory committees and the development of curricula, and all these are not fast moving things. Not necessarily that the plan is short term, but it almost seems that we're bringing the institutions together and we'll see what the metrics are. But, you know, 5 years, what are we going to judge it? 10 years, what are we going to judge it on? And although it seems that there's a great deal of concentration of power in directing this, I know that there's going to be others involved. But if we're going to go with, you know, the mayor being the lead on this, then bringing some of those parties to the table, unless there's some clear avenues to what this looks like, it seems to me that I just don't want to see us end up, you know, 10 years from now having the conversation of, well, somebody's to blame, you know?
Yeah, the reality is I don't have any more hair to lose, so I can't have this conversation 10 years from now. I guess what I was alluding to is, the city, the city can only do something. This is not going to be a quick fix. This is, again, going to be, 10 years down the road. Hopefully our kids will benefit from this. But I think what I was looking at is taking, some of the good programs that come out of the college and university, and, the city gives a lot of tax breaks and property tax breaks and incentives to manufacturing companies who want to expand their base here. We'll provide, no taxes for 10 years if you hire another 100 employees that, somebody putting seats together for the minivan plan. But if we could direct some of that investment into more maybe tech engineered companies or engineering companies or even health services companies, and offer them the same incentives that we offer the manufacturing companies, and see where these kids are coming from and where they go, and look for companies locally that can expand off of that. That is something you could do immediately. That, I don't know if it's the save all end all, but you can certainly help by, it all comes down to money when it's in business. So if you can help these companies expand the same way we try to help FCA or any of the other auto manufacturing companies, I think something like that could make a difference. But it has to start with, what are we sending out of the higher education institutions, and what companies are already here or someone we could bring there and help them expand, so these kids don't have to leave.
Well, so, obviously full and fair disclosure, I'm a very happy full-time faculty member at St. Clair College.
So
But
there you go. Give Pat $1 million.
there you go. There you go. And I'll solve all the problems. But I guess the reason I said that is because I always have this thing when people call all the students kids. I can assure you that they're not all, and there's a lot of
relative to how old
they're
I am,
young
they're all
adults
kids.
as well as people coming back for retraining and all of that. But here's what I do want to say. One of the things that I didn't see, and I have to say that I didn't read all the report, all 318 pages of whatever it was, although I did try to scan as much as I could, and I wish I had the time, and I hope to find the time to do so, because I think and especially now that it's passed, it's an important document, and it's going to be the framework for where we go forward. I think what's missed is actually finding out, and correct me if I'm wrong, it could be in there, and maybe, Fraser will let us know if the data came from somewhere, but people who do come in from other places to make Windsor home, how does that happen? Now, I think that there is sort of, it could be immigration, right? And so we can take a look at sort of international, we can take a look at different things. But I find, and I'm just going to say this out of my experience and who I have met who is not from Windsor, including myself. How did I end up in Windsor? I came to school here. I came to the University of Windsor. And I think that that's a really important piece. It's not just only our own children and educating them and where they may go, because I think many of us would like to see our kids stay here if the opportunities are here, and depending on what it is that they want to do, and can they find their success in Windsor, but also the enormous opportunity that presents itself from when we go outside our catchment area as post-secondary institutions, internationally or domestically, and bring people here. It was really interesting to me when I did scan the report, the aspects of how Windsor is seen from the outside, asking somebody from Hamilton, asking somebody from Ottawa, what do you think about Windsor? I can tell you that, mind you, I was, 19 or 20 years old. I didn't even know where Windsor was when I applied to the law school here. I just heard it was a really good, progressive, really good law school. And I really didn't know where it was. I mean, I kind of ashamed to say that, but I was from Toronto, the center of the universe, and it didn't really, right? So the perceptions of Windsor from somebody who's never been are very different. And we've heard this, and it's in the report. Then people who are the biggest cheerleaders of Windsor, who really, besides people who are from here, and many of those are negative, but nonetheless, it's people who recognize what a gem Windsor is because they've come from somewhere else and they never realized, because all they had heard was something else or nothing at all. And so I think that represents a huge opportunity, and that's something that comes from the post-secondary institutions. They do bring people in, and some of them can stay. But it goes back to what Doug said, and that is, what is there for them to do here, and can they make a living? We know that there's it's a good cost of living, and although it's getting higher and higher, relatively speaking, people can still afford housing and all those things. But you pretty well have to get people to Windsor to appreciate Windsor. And at least the post-secondary institutions opens that door. Do I think that's all there is? No. And it goes back to, what is the municipality's role and what is everybody else's role in that?
So I'd really like to pick up on that because it's a perfect segue to what I want to talk about. And I want to talk about this through an example. St. Clair College created a program called the Data and Analytics Program in the Department of Business a few years back. They started graduating students last year. And the reason I bring this up is because this is, partly part of what I do for a living. So I'm really close to this stuff and I see it. Um, there is a pressing need for those skills in our community. Many organizations know that they need those skills, but there are many, many more who could benefit from them who don't realize that gap even exists in their organization, that they could get a return on investment far beyond the salary that they would pay to an analytics specialist if they found room in their payroll for one. So I think that what would be really useful going forward, and as part of this initiative, when we talk about a talent plan and we talk about the municipality and post-secondary institutions being part of it, that's really good. But one of the things that it was really clear from this meeting, one of the things that the mayor and city council can do is they can bring the focus of local media attention onto an issue simply by putting it on the agenda. This issue was no more pressing a month ago than it is today, but everyone is talking about it today and no one was talking about it a month ago. So the point that I want to make is that what I see in the community is I don't see yet a huge uptake of those graduating students, those talented young people, and maybe not so young people who have the data and analytics skills that are badly needed in our community. The uptake isn't as fast as it should be in terms of creating roles and hiring those roles. If the municipality and the post-secondary institutions are able to use the power of the agenda setting power that city council and the mayor have to better communicate opportunities like that to local businesses, businesses will benefit, will we will improve youth retention, and it'll be good for the city. So I do think there's something that can happen. I just don't think it's fair to put it on the institutions completely and say, what are the institutions doing about youth retention? They're producing people we need, even if we don't always know that we need them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And Pat, I like what you were saying about how to actually get people to Windsor. I mean, you start to actually think about that one and wrap your head around it. Like it's really difficult. But I like how you said, it's the educational institutions that the door is already open there, and that's probably why one of the reasons that in the lift strategy itself, the T was for talent, of course, this attraction and retention and retraining, but it was made clear that the location, infrastructure, and future economy, the other three pillars really can't work. The report makes clear without that talent component. But I want to hear a bit about what you guys, any standout quotes, I guess, from our illustrious city councilors. What was it like, Doug, listening to what they had to say about this report? I mean, I made the Borelli joke earlier on, but were there any standout ones that were real head scratchers, or was it just a robust conversation that was intellectually stimulating for all involved?
I hear Mr. Borelli is available. So if there is any other talk show or podcast in the city that would like to bring him on to hear his commentary on the issues of the day, I highly endorse that. I think we need a little bit more Borelli in our lives. But the counselors who were there around the table, the current counselors, I thought that the questioning of delegates, it was pretty lopsided. You could see that some counselors, so I'm going to single out a few, um, Kieran McKenzie, Fabio Casante, Reno Bordelin, had read the report, had engaged deeply in the process of building the report, and had a lot of things to speak to delegates about that I thought were really useful and teased out important things. And that's not to say that the other counselors around the table didn't contribute. I think that they made contributions in terms of questioning to the delegates, but those three stood out. Um, and then that's one piece. And the other piece is the debate, which I thought went in some really fascinating directions. Yes, it was a unanimous vote, but in terms of, and it was always going to be there, you could see from the very beginning of the debate that it was going in the direction of unanimous. But it was interesting to see so much tension in the room and so many issues being explored, and sometimes defensively and sometimes a little bit aggressively. Um, in a debate that was going to land in a unanimous yes vote. One of the things that really stood out for me, and I'm really curious to hear what Pat thinks about this, but one of the things that really stood out for me was Joanne Gignac in debate in this meeting seemed so concerned about defending her record and defending the record of city council over the past decade, whether it be on economic development or investments in the downtown. Um, and it just seemed kind of out of place to me, because this wasn't about holding, this meeting was not about holding people to account for past performance. This meeting was about what is the strategy for the future. And I found it so odd that Councillor Gignac thought that the best use of her time in debate was talking about things that the city council chose to do in 2006 or the city council chose to do in 2009 or whatever. It seemed out of place to me, and I really am curious and wonder about what the thought process that led to that was.
You're on mute right now, Pat. That's the first one of 2021 for you.
Sorry,
Congratulations.
thanks.
Pat buying the drinks.
There you go. Well, and in fact, if we did a drinking game that, and I had to buy around every time Joanne Gignac said in the past, then I'd be broke. But absolutely, it was very, very defensive. It stood out to me as well. Mike Hurst got mentioned, Eddie Francis got mentioned, constant connection to the past. My personal squint came every time it was mentioned that $200 million was invested in downtown. And when she joined city council, downtown was a shithole and now it's much better. For different, like it was just, and $200 million, including the aquatic center, which, and we can just go on and talk about what some of those investments are.
Well, that's only $100 million then.
Well, right. And the best financial records that the aquatic center and Adventure Bay have shown have been in the time of the pandemic, because it's been closed, for goodness sakes. So, it was very defensive. And, Joanne Gignac has been on council, I think, since 2003. So for sure, she is, senior around that table, but it did feel that she needed to defend. But then again, we've been talking about economic diversification for, in many ways, a lot longer, or at least much more prominently in our conversations than they have around that council table. So yes, some of it started with the mayor's inauguration speech. And, kudos to him for, it took a little while, but to move this process forward to the point where they were having that conversation on Monday night. But at the same time, this is not, in my opinion, an economic diversification report. If I could be honest about what I think, I'm going to connect it to a little bit to what the mayor said at the end, when he was, really pleased to see, despite some things that I think, some of the questions that were asked, I think, and in a couple of times he actually intervened and interjected and spoke while others were. In one case, completely inappropriately, in my opinion. But, he was really pleased with the fact that it was going to be passed unanimously. And then he talked a little bit about, the path to how they got there. But really, and what he said was, this shouldn't be political. Now, look, we're a political talk show. We believe everything is political, but you better believe this report is political. First of all, it wasn't an economic development firm that did it. It was a PR firm. Okay. That is political. The way it was managed was political. And frankly, that's that's what it is. But at the same time, the people around that table are also political. They're elected officials. And of course, the whole thing is political, and it's going to have to be managed and stick handled. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's just what it is. I'll tell you what they're not. They're not economists. So, all of these conversations, it's going to take a lot more when it comes to the implementation plan and what we look at. I think that somebody like Joanne, who with that kind of experience, Joanne Geniak, with that kind of experience, institutional memory, I think is a really important thing in an institution. And now, for public institutions, primarily ones like governments, any level of governments, where you have the public really looking at you for the longest time, it's not as relevant as other institutions and other organizations to have that, because we're sort of all here and all watching. And I think there is a role to play in, especially when somebody has an idea that was tried, and somebody needs to bring forward an example of why they may not work, although in many cases there have to be qualifiers that maybe the conditions weren't right then and they're different, and maybe we can learn from it and do something. And I know I'm talking very theoretical, but that's not the approach that was taken. It was, as Doug says, and I do agree, a very defensive, almost like she had to protect the record of why things are the way they are. And by the way, not so bad and maybe better.
Yeah. So speaking of defensive, the other thing that I thought was fascinating in the debate was what a prominent place the $50,000 a year investment in the Grand Prix in Detroit was. Mayor Dilkins went out of his way to bring up and defend the $50,000 investment and used it as an example of a good, smart investment in economic diversification that gets becomes a political football, and that naysayers are able to glom onto and make negative comments about. Um, in my opinion, that's total bullshit. I don't think that there is one single word in this report that justifies spending $50,000 a year on the Detroit Grand Prix. And for Mayor Dilkins to do that, I thought it was really interesting. And it sounds like that $50,000 is going to continue to be in the city budget, and it's now going to be earmarked as economic diversification.
Hey, if it helps me get to see the Grand Prix for free, it is the best economic diversification strategy they can ever have.
You
It
sit in the
won't,
mayor's
Don.
box at the Grand Prix, Don?
Of course.
So,
Yeah.
did you guys ever apply for media passes for it through Rose City Politics?
I was gonna last year, but then
Uh,
COVID hit. It all went to hell in a handbasket. But I think it's a fabulous idea because
I shit you not, the media passes come with access to a massage booth for media. So I'm just saying, we gotta go next year, and we're getting nice massages, and then we can interview, our city councilors and ask them how their massages were.
I would just like to
Following
say that now
we'll have
I'm the official IndyCar racing correspondent for Rose City Politics. So
Oh
I
yeah.
just don't understand how massage parlor could be and massages could be said in such a positive light right now, where the massage parlors were actually mentioned on Monday night's meeting, and it was by Joanne Geniak of how she found downtown when she was elected, and it was not so positively said. So I don't get it.
I don't
Hey,
think they do those
50
kind of massages at the Grand Prix.
Oh, I see.
Oh, Doug, you have not hung around race car people, my friend. But I think a good point what Pat had mentioned, and this kind of perfectly crystallizes her point, is when you're talking economic diversification and you're talking to politicians, the unfortunate reality is you don't have to be a genius to get elected to be city councilor. It doesn't all of a sudden make you an expert on everything. And if you're going to take a report like this and go forward with it, but base it out of the mayor's office, and no offense to the mayor, he's never, from what I can understand, run a business in his entire life. This is when you politicize these things and they never go anywhere. And that's why it's so much more important to take something like this. If you're going to have an organization, a roundtable, a task force, bring in people who have done this before. Bring in people who have expanded their businesses locally, internationally, whatever the case may be, and let them lead on these things. Because when you have the mayor leading or even anyone around city council, they're not experts in this kind of stuff, and it's going to go nowhere because it's going to be hyper politicized. And as Pat mentioned with Councillor Geniak, they're going to start going back to, well, we're doing good stuff, when the reality is we're not doing good stuff, because we wouldn't be having these conversations if we were.
I think the other thing that the report did, and it wasn't mentioned on Monday, but I think one of the things that the report did is that, and in fact, I think it's mentioned under weakness when it takes a look at strengths and weaknesses of our community. It actually had under there a weakness that we have been so dependent on the automotive industry in the past, and I don't think that any time that has ever been, and I just sort of laid it out there, right? But there have been people who have skirted around and used very gentle language to talk about that in relation to the need to take a look at economic diversification, and that has not been met well by members and leaders in the community. Again, going back to being very, very defensive about that. And I thought this is the first time that we saw it. It took the outsiders to come in and do it and wrap it up in a bunch of other stuff, but really it clearly lays it on the line. And this is not, again, this is not disrespectful to people that work in the automotive industries and all that has happened in our community and built on that. But the fact that it recognizes that for a variety of reasons, that it's a weakness now. Again, I think the report mentions both because we've lost, investments elsewhere for cheaper labor, and as well as the fact that we're moving to, electric and the shift to, autonomous vehicles. And so I think that is something that did not exist before. Like, I think now we can say it, being backed by this report without being disloyal to our own community and community members.
Well, I think to go off of what you just said there, Pat, with the the advancements that are being made in automobile technology, if we're just going to focus on the manufacturing aspect of it, the reality is a lot of that is getting automated out. You're not going to need people to put cars together. It's even happening now at FCA. I mean, the number of people who work there putting out the same amount of product is far fewer than it was, 10, 20 years ago when we were at our peak. So if you're going to focus on that sector of the economy, it can't be on, we don't want to, do the research and, design the cars of the future. We want to put them together, much like Mayor Dilkin said when this had come up before. We want to just build the cars, not design them. That is going to be a failing strategy no matter how you look at it.
Yeah, I think there's a real temptation for politicians in Windsor to do exactly what you're alluding to and skirt around these issues. And particularly when you talk about auto manufacturing, not only is auto manufacturing a huge part of our economy, but it's also, it looms large in people's minds and in their hearts. So it's really dangerous to be seen to be critical of that. But, the things that you guys said, I think are interesting. And it got me thinking that there was there was a group that was notably absent both from the report and in the delegations, and that's organized labor in this town. Organized labor is a really important component of our community, more so than many other Canadian cities. The only mention that I noted in reading the report about organized labor was negative. The only comment that I noted in the report about organized labor was that, that there's a perception that a strong union culture is a negative in terms of attracting investment. And I wonder if the report authors did interview anybody who represents the labor movement in this town. And I think that is potentially a risk and a seed of something that could develop into a concern, because this process, and I think many recognize this process needs to be inclusive. It needs to include everybody. Everyone needs to see themselves reflected in this initiative and see themselves as part of the path forward. Where is organized labor in any of this, and shouldn't they be at the table?
It's interesting that, looking through the report right now, all that it says is seek partnership with local and national union leaders to support the transition to EV. But yeah, that's like, okay, we'll get to that down the road. Like we need it, we recognize it. But yeah, where we're what it's interesting that they weren't there as a delegate to talk about this with the input. I agree with you, Pat. I mean, it's a really stark message to read. I mean, it's from an external party, but to just say specifically, "Hey, organized labor is, it could be a bit of an issue for you in terms of the higher wages associated with it." And it's interesting to see the fact that they just said outright that our automotive sector is one of our weaknesses. I think it's something that we're going to be able to use as a building off point, and they're clearly trying to build to it. But Doug, I do have to agree with you. I mean, it's starting things off on a bit of a negative, trying to get the buy-in from them now, when they've sort of already been put offside a little bit in two ways: that they weren't there at the start of the conversation directly, and also saying, hey, not only are you guys like the problem, but also the industry that you represents is a problem too. I mean, it's a negative built on a negative.
Well,
So
there are definitely more unions than just the ones that represent auto, and it's, I don't, just to be clear, it's not that they thought that the automotive sector or the people that work for them are a weakness, but our reliance and our failure to diversify will be at our own, we do it at our own peril. But I think that that was one of the advantages of having, I know there was criticism of where they went and who they hired to do this report, but I think in many ways, the fact that they were so outside provided them with the opportunity to say that. I can't imagine if it was more closer to home, had that been in there in such a way that it wouldn't have received more pushback, and I didn't see pushback on that. It's almost like that's the starting point of the discussion. And it goes back to, what the mayor said in his inauguration speech, of course, but um, he didn't phrase it exactly that way.
yeah, I think though that there's a concern here because labor is an important part of the community, and they're an influential part of the community. A lot of people take their cues from the labor movement in terms of what they think about issues or what they choose to take action on, and that can be a positive or it can be a negative. And I think that there's a tendency among organized labor, especially in the manufacturing sector, to see technology and diversification as a potential risk. And I don't think that there was anything has been done yet to turn that negative or potential negative into a positive. And I think it happens through dialogue. So one of the things that I would love to see is more dialogue with organized labor, with labor unions, labor organizations in our community, more dialogue about what diversification is going to mean for their members, how they can be a part of the solution, how organized labor, who not only they don't just negotiate and strike and advocate for workers, although those are all important things. They're also involved in training, quite significant involvement in training in some cases, and they do have a role to play. And there are abilities there and resources that can be tapped into as part of a skills development plan for the community. So I certainly hope that going forward that gap is filled and that we have more of a labor presence in this process. But
Yeah.
I wonder too, because this is a two-way street. I wonder about what the appetite is among labor leadership to do that. And that's a good question to ask them, and maybe we'll have a chance to ask someone at some point about that, because they have to be willing to come to the party too. Dialogue takes two people to happen. And so I wonder what the attitude is. They have been silent on this issue, and I think that in general, since 2018 in the mayor's inaugural speech, there has been a whole lot of silence from the labor movement on that. And I think that if the economy of Windsor's future is going to have the same level of organization in terms of labor organization as it does now or as it has in the past, then that attitude probably has to change.
I can just ask one question. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, John. Going back to what Pat said about some of these organizations, and I'm going to direct this at Doug because obviously he's our tech guy. You know, our local tech organizations, your WeTechs, your business accelerators, those kind of things. Is there a vested interest by the people who serve on the boards there, which are generally the CEOs of local tech companies, your Alpha Cores and things like that? Are they really going to be open to looking at actual diversification strategies if it means it may actually take a hit at their business and may actually, in some level, take away from some other business? Will there be a reluctance to let outside people come in, even outside tech companies come in and say, hey, this is what you should be doing, when it could actually detrimentally affect their business?
I think if you take a really short-term view, as a business owner, there is a potential to see things that way. I'm talking about my competitors and peers, so I'm cognizant. I don't want to be too
I'm just trying to get
critical.
you blackballed.
Yeah, but I think that there certainly are some short-term risks, and so one example I would give is that many tech employers have enjoyed relatively low labor costs compared to similar companies elsewhere in North America up until 2018, 2019. I think there are some signs that there is some upward pressure on wages. When a company like Edison Financial wants to hire 44 new tech workers in Windsor this year, considering that we have such a small pool of talent as it is, especially a small pool of senior talent, that that kind of demand is only going to drive wages upward. It's going to create churn. It's going to create risk. But I think that those short-term challenges are things that you can you shouldn't be focused on as a business owner. What you should be focused on is the opportunity. And if we have a bigger, more thriving tech sector, that's going to create a bigger pie for everybody to fight for their slice of. I think especially many of our larger incumbents in the space would benefit. Some of those companies have grown geographically. They have gone to other cities in order to try to find growth. So I got to think that they would welcome more growth in the sector at home, because that creates more opportunity, and it's a lot easier to to pursue opportunities in your hometown than to open up a division in London or Kitchener or even further afield. So short term and long term, I think it can only be beneficial. But yeah, if you're narrow minded and only thinking about pinching pennies tomorrow and the next day, yeah, it's a risk.
Another area that another group there, it was clear, you mentioned who did a lot of homework. It was very clear, for example, Reno Bordelin clearly had read the report, asked a lot of really good questions, really found it interesting, and asked Rachel Wolf, who I thought was really good, despite the time difference and how late it was for her, in her responses. I didn't get to see the presentation on the fact that, Small Business Center was not part of this report. BIAs were not part of this report. Basically, business was represented, but big business was represented. And so that was another piece that did not seem to get a lot of love in that report, or reference in that report as well. Especially when you take a look at, and of course, again, disclosure, I'm on the BIA board for downtown. Especially when you take a look at how much focus there was downtown, and that I know we're talking about talent here. In some ways, we're talking about infrastructure as well. And when we do take a look at that, the pieces of making a livable, wonderful community that people want to stay here is a big part of it. I was very happy to see that, and it was really good to see the focus, particularly on downtown, not just our riverfront, but our entire sort of commercial district in the core. The definite themes around density and housing and increasing residential units in the core, and all of that I thought was really positive, and a lot of things that we've been saying. But I also found it interesting that at some point I felt that something happened to the mayor as he was observing these conversations. And I think it was triggered, first of all, by Joanne Geniak's comments to some extent. I think there was a clear rapport between the lead on the report, Rachel Wolf, and Councillor Bordelin. In fact, I think when it was up his turn to ask questions, and I think she said something along the lines like, "Okay, now I'm nervous," or something along those lines. So she obviously got to know him enough to go, "Okay, he's as supportive as he was. He still asks tough questions, right?" And I think that's important. But I do want to mention again, I'm going to wear another hat, and that is the mention by Vincent Georgie, who came on and outed the committee that has been formed downtown, which I am part of, called the Downtown Districting Committee. And he explained how that happened. And it was interesting because Vincent sent out an email that morning to the committee members saying, "Hey, I'm going to be at City Council. I'm going to out us today." And those important pieces, the cultural pieces and the revitalization of downtown as being an integral part of this. Now, what's fascinating is here's the mayor who has led this report. His fingerprints are on it. A big key piece is he himself wanted to make sure that he mentioned that the college and the university being the anchors of this plan had to be there and all those things. But then when he got to his summation, despite all those things, I felt that he started to walk back a little bit. The amount of attention, and I don't know if that was in reaction to the downtown councillor and what he observed there or what it was exactly, but he started to suddenly walk back. In fact, he mentioned districting. He went to Walkerville and the distillery districting, and then went and mentioned, Wine.East. He mentioned Sandwich. I think he may have mentioned, Riverside, and didn't say downtown. And I thought it was just kind of a little fascinating that suddenly I felt he got, oh, okay, that one got a little too much attention, but it's right in the report. And so I couldn't really understand that. It caused a little confusion. I have no doubt that the mayor will support downtown districting. In my view, I don't think so. I mean, it was brought forward by Vincent Georgie, who leads it, and all the organizations that we've talked about here are part of it, at least a lot of the pillars, and anybody having anything to do with downtown, including the university, including the college, but much more so the cultural aspects, the art gallery, the Capitol Theater, the Chrysler Theater, and property owners and the BIA, bringing all those pieces together. I think I think Vincent was right in bringing it forward now because it completely aligned with this report. And so that was a wonderful thing to see. But it was really curious, sort of to go off the rails a little bit. I felt that he was not really the mayor I'm talking about now in his closing sort of arguments or summation and wrapping it up. And it may have been the issue of poverty that got mentioned. Because I think it was Reno Bordelin who mentioned the social aspects. Homelessness got a passing sort of, again, you can correct me if I'm wrong because I didn't read the whole report, but I think that homeless was sort of only mentioned in terms of the negative aspects of what people see, as opposed to a piece of things need to be addressed more broadly in order for this whole package to holistically look at what's going to happen in our community.
Yep. So I think there's a whole lot there, Pat.
Yeah.
I think that you're right. I noted that too in the change in the mayor's tone. I think that he was a little bit less happy with the party at the end than he was at the beginning. And I think you have some insight there as to potentially why. Partly, I think it was seeing his right flank maybe be less enamored with the plan and a little bit more excited in talking about the successes of the past. Maybe that was part of it, and maybe it was the attention that the downtown got, and that maybe the more progressive councillors were finding things in the report that aligned with their agenda, and maybe that was a little bit concerning. But I think ultimately, and it's so hard, it's so hard to look into people's souls and minds and know what their motivations and thoughts are. But I think Mayor Dilkins really wants to own this.
Mhm.
And I think that that's understandable. He staked out, he staked a big claim to this territory in 2018 in his inaugural speech. I think he really wants to own this, and maybe more for legacy reasons than political reasons. I think this is really personally important to Mayor Dilkins, and I don't know. I hope he sees and seizes the opportunity um, to enhance his reputation and enhance his legacy by finding ways to collaborate in a more positive way with everyone around the council table, to take and promote and support good ideas wherever they're to be found. I think there's a real opportunity to turn a page here and to create something new and important in our community. But I don't think we're going to get there if the mayor tries to go it alone. I think that's a big risk based on what I saw on Monday night.
Well, and we can get to how what the next steps are in implementation, but I totally agree with you, and I think this is an opportunity for the mayor because you know I first of all, I'm really glad that a legacy does not involve a building, and that a legacy does not involve structures. This is much more important to the community, and again, I can't say it enough. Good for him for what he's done so far. The rest of it will depend on him. And I think and we've said it before, if he can recognize that there are people, whether he likes them or not, in the community that are willing actually to work hard and be in that boat, rowing in the direction that he wants to take it. Okay. This is not about kudos to anybody. You don't have to like it, but if they're strong rowers, you should have them in that boat.
Okay, we're talking about an economic development report. We're not talking about like Castor Troy from Face Off here. We're not switching people. It's still going to be Dilkins at the end of the day.
I live in
Well,
hope, John.
Like, I'm sorry,
so
I'll be the cynical one here. I agree with you, Pat. Everyone in the ship rowing the same way, lifting tides and lifting us all together. But I mean, as Doug said, I mean, we're looking here at what's probably going to be a legacy project. We all sort of agree with this, and that's going to come with a significant amount of vanity that comes with it. And if you're not willing to, do the things that need to be done according to what the mayor's office says or this mayor says, I could see people being pushed out of that boat. And, then you end up with the same perpetual issue that Windsor's dealt with for a while now. I hope I'm wrong. And I hope that I'm just being the cynical voice too. For some reason, like the three of you in agreement on this one.
Well, no, you know what, John, I know I'm cautiously optimistic here. I don't know that character can change necessarily, but I listened very carefully, particularly at the end, and I listened to him very carefully. And the implementation is going to be important. I don't think that it's we should assume that it's going to be directed out of the mayor's office. Of course, the mayor is going to have be a major player in this, but he was very clear. He said it's going to come back to council, and council is going to be a big part of this. And so if we take him at what he said and at his word, that does give us reason to, I'm gonna be fair to him in that case. So we'll see. The other thing is, if it's out of the mayor's office, is that out of the mayor's office and chief of staff? Or, the report doesn't say that. The report says city hall. So it's kind of vague that way, right? Like, I mean, city hall means different things to me. I see administration as being city hall. I don't see the mayor's office as being city hall. And that coincides with the new CAO being brought in. And I can't imagine a better time to start your chapter as, a new CAO in the city then to be brought on. In fact, it actually, those things from an organizational and governance perspective would make a lot of sense, that there is such a close connection between what is the platform for the development of the strategic plan. This is almost strategic directions, but the development of a strategic plan based on new leadership from your administration. So in many ways, one would think that this should be housed much more so under the guidance and direction of a new CAO, and added to sort of your performance measures, buddy. Like from an organizational governance perspective, it makes a lot of sense in terms of how it's happened.
Well, I agree with that. Let's hope that, this is something that ends positively for us. We're embarking on a 10-year mission. It feels like the start of the original Star Trek here, just double
Now,
the duration.
it sounds like you're trying to wrap up, so maybe we didn't get to really juicy stuff. So let me add a couple of juicy stuff here a little bit at the end. First of all, I'm going to mention hospital because Don asked me to. And I do want to say that, there were a lot of different, right? There were a lot of different interpretations of how the hospital was or wasn't mentioned in this report. And I think what is really clear and we need to recognize is that at no time in any way, shape, or form does this report in any way endorse the location of the hospital. They take it as a given. In fact, there were questions about this specifically, and I think Councillor Jewin Gill was one of them, trying to get it. But Rachel was very clear that that was taken as a given. And, there was no defense of that in any way. And I think it's pretty clear, given all the other things that they have said in terms of, densification, the core, the importance of the core, the importance of the downtown. Had they been asked to do this, 10 years ago where a hospital should go or whatever, that there would have been an answer there. They clearly did not want to touch that. And I think that says a lot. I think that says a lot. That's really interesting, given how much that this report was commissioned by the mayor's office, given all the politics that we know have been around it. I think that's absolutely quite fascinating that they steered totally clear of it. And I think that's about as strong a message that you can get reading between the lines as anything.
I guess if I can just add one more thing before we wrap up. As the newly anointed IndyCar correspondent for Rose City Politics, the IndyCar season starts April 18th at Barber Motorsport Parks in Alabama, and you can come visit your fourth favorite Rose City Politics host as he covers the Detroit Indy on June 12th. Please don't talk to the masseuse. She's doing a very hard job for me.
We're going to cut that out, right?
No, that's the best part of the show right there.
But I know we're wrapping up, but I think we would be remiss in not talking a little bit about the Windsor Economic Development Commission, because we talked about where this is going to be housed, and we're kind of wondering where exactly the balance is going to be between the mayor's office and City Hall, and where does that leave Windsor Economic Development Commission? I look at Stephen McKenzie, CEO of WEETC, was at the meeting. I would imagine it must have been a very difficult seat to be sitting in his place at that particular meeting. He was a cheerleader for it, much more so that I felt that he had to be, given the really a lot of unanswered questions. We know that they've invested, somewhere under $400,000 for this process. There's another $550,000 that's being set aside. What's going to happen to WEETC? What role do they play? I realize that, the answer, which was a good one, is that is more of a regional economic development commission. And this was a very Windsor specific report. I think there are really some interesting questions around that. I noticed today that the mayor at 1 o'clock hosted a show with Stephen McKenzie and the Small Business Center. Did I say hosted a show? Kind of like us. He hosted a show. Remember, this is his calling. One day he will go back to it and he will be brilliant at it. I didn't get a chance to watch it today at 1, so I don't know if anybody did. And I guess that was, I hadn't seen that advertise that show prior to Monday and or even prior to today, frankly. So I imagine that that was a little bit of let's bring Small Business Center back into the fold and make sure that we know that we care. I guess I'm not sure.
Pat and I need to work on our comedic timing. That's all I'm going to say.
Sorry, Don, but
Yeah, so I
not
know
sorry, Don.
we're now in overtime.
Okay.
That's okay. I don't mind. I have a few things to say about this. I didn't think that this was Stephen McKenzie's strongest performance as a delegate or in public. Um, it seemed pretty clear to me, and that's just my personal impression, but it seemed pretty clear to me that Mr. McKenzie was uncomfortable. Um, and he was a cheerleader for the report. He supported the initiative, described how it lines up with the way that WeedSea has been working and plans to work in the future. But yeah, I thought that he was pretty uncomfortable, and it was really interesting to watch. I think that actually that whole meeting, every time I watch City Council, I'm just fascinated by the facial expressions and the body language. Even though you're on camera, after you've been on camera for a few hours, you sort of tend to forget, and there's so much to see, and I think that people should watch these meetings, even if you only watch little bits of it. The last 10 minutes of this meeting would be a great one to sit down and watch, just for the body language and the way that people present themselves to the camera. But Stephen McKenzie's body language was not, in my eyes, was not that of a person who is excited and thrilled about this initiative. I think that there are a ton of unanswered questions about the organization. It's really hard to understand what the city's return on investment is for its, something like $1.5 million a year into the Economic Development Corporation, if we also feel now we need to add another $550,000 to fund economic diversification for the city of Windsor. Something doesn't compute here, and in my mind, the solution is not to continue to pile more money on. Hey, we're going to keep that 50 grand for the Grand Prix. That we can't change that. We're going to keep putting $1.5 million into WeedSea, and now we're going to pile more on top. There has to be some assessment done, and some realignment, perhaps, of budgetary priorities, and maybe that was the reason for Mr. McKenzie's discomfort.
And interesting that SBC was what was focused on today, because and Sabrina was on, and some really good work that comes out of that initiative out of WeedSea. And it's going to be really interesting to know. I'm sure that WeedSea is working on things that none of us know about. I mean, that's just the nature of economic development. And so who knows? Certainly, here's who knows. The mayor would know. And talk about being uncomfortable. While the mayor is, I don't believe he's the chair of WeedSea, but I mean, he's a major player on WeedSea, right? So you're here reporting basically, or you're here to endorse a report on economic development, that a major player around your table that directs your work, commissioned out of his office, and now you're here to say, great, this is what it's all about. I know that we're ending, and I'm gonna let you know when I'm finished, so that Don could actually come in with a last, end it with a dumb joke. But
it's way too late now.
well, too bad then. I do want to say that I thought Justin Falconer from Workforce Windsor Essex was an excellent delegate, provided a lot of really good information. And to me, when I take a look at all the organizations that have pieces and in some cases overlap, not necessarily Workforce Windsor Essex, I'm thinking more along the lines of what passes as incubators, or what passes as, Genesis, and um, um, the centers, that does it. I think that we should do like an audit. Did I forget my own one? The audits of what these things do. Is there overlap? Can things be consolidated, or can we more effectively work, to develop? Entrepreneurship is mentioned a lot. So to leave out some of those small business pieces that are necessary in terms of entrepreneurship, I think has to be part of the plan. And the last thing I'll end with is WeTech. you know, I'm reluctant to be overly critical of, you know, people in our own community, but I have to say that I don't think that the answer to what the municipality can do is I don't think the answer is that we need more marketing and more cheerleading. I think that we need to really get significant things done. And you know, especially when we're talking about so much focus on talent, in particularly in the tech sector. I don't think that I personally wasn't satisfied with all the answers that I heard from that meeting.
Well, from an organization like Weed See, if you come into this meeting and you're taking this as almost an attack, that is kind of telling that you're probably not too proud of your record on the past, and you think this is all being called out. And you can look at it two ways. You can think our organization's being attacked because we didn't do a good job. But if you actually believed you were doing a really good job, you could pounce on this report and look at ways to expand the good work you're doing. So his reaction to it probably tells you all we really need to hear.
That's a fair point, and it wasn't meant to be funny though, right?
No, so
Okay,
you
I'm just
ruined the
check- I'm
joke
just
part. So
checking, man.
I thought I'd end on a serious comment and try and redeem myself at this
I think
point.
it's a good point though.
Well, I mean, what's the record to defend right now? That's a really tough place to be, especially with this oncoming right now, and with the track record of former Weed See leadership. You know, you must be thinking internally, like, God, if I could just get out of this without causing another problem, that'd be pretty good.
Don't make me come to council and report.
In addition to the fact that you know, the only thing most people know about Weed See right now in the community, if they know anything at all, is that they're behind the We Can't Wait campaign.
Oh, that's right. It's We Can't Wait Wednesday, you guys.
Is it?
We didn't do anything for that.
Come on, hold on a
man.
second. Hold on. Apparently, I'm supposed to send an email to somebody. Hold on a second. To the gorilla, I think. Hold on. I'm actually going to look. I'm going to look up what the traction is before we end. Okay, this is how we'll end. If you want to joke, hold on a minute.
We're going to look for We Can't Wait on
I
Twitter.
am. Hold on a second.
Did we find out when this day of action was announced for the We Can't Wait?
I don't know. Hold on.
Because
this is good. Is anybody else looking up? We Can't Wait.
Looking. Okay.
Okay, good. Let's get some stats happening.
Okay, so for We Can't Wait Wednesday, in the past 24 hours, it looks like there's about a half dozen uses of the hashtag. One, there's a TV show that I don't know anything about is tagged We Can't Wait.
I've got the mayor's.
There's some vaccination stuff. We can't wait for vaccines. Okay, fair enough. Oh, there's the mayor. So it looks
I'm looking at it.
It looks like only Mayor Drew Dilkins took part in We Can't Wait Wednesday this week, but maybe next week
hold on a second. Hold on a second. Let's be really fair. He says that today is the hashtag We Can't Wait Day of Action. It's time to make your voice heard loud and clear. Join the campaign. And let me just take a look. There is one comment, hold on this tweet. Yes, it's from the We Can't Wait campaign, replying with applause and 7 likes.
A sizzling 7 likes, Pat.
It's like when Facebook puts up a post and then Instagram comments underneath it, and then WhatsApp comments underneath that. Just masturbatory monopoly.
We ended with a joke anyway.
In their defense, there was probably 8,000 negative comments. You just had to delete them all, or they wouldn't really play.
No, this is Twitter. Can you do that?
Let's delete comments. Yeah, you can delete comments.
You can do that. Why didn't anybody tell me? No. All right.
Well, let's just hope the traction for Takeout Tuesday is better than We Can't Wait Wednesday, because I really like a lot of our restaurants still here in Windsor, Essex. But on that note, we're going to go. That's the show. We did it. We got through it all. This was part 2 of Rose City Politics, diving into the Public First PR economic development report that was put together for us. It cost upwards of $400,000. And we're on a 10-year mission to boldly go where Windsor was once before, and maybe we can get to once again, maybe. We have had Doug Sartori, Don Merrifield, and Pat Papadeus here tonight. I'm John Lidkey. Thank you to our Patreon subscribers. Thank you to Leuna625, Building Better Communities. Thank you to BizX Magazine. Be sure to pick up a copy. Head to their website, like them on Facebook and Twitter. Read the stuff that we put into that magazine. I'm happy. I got to put out a Castor Troy reference from Face Off tonight. So like anytime I get to do a deep cut like that, pretty good in my book. So this is Rose City Politics, and we will see you next week. And we're probably going to be talking about the budget. Cheers.